Hello. So good to be here with you again this month. This month, what I want to discuss is the idea and concept of wealth. If you were to look up the definition of wealth, the first thing that populates is an abundance of valuable possessions or money. And that's, when you think about it, what we've all been conditioned to. Wealth means you have an abundance of valuable possessions. So whatever those possessions are for you that you want, the nice car, the big house, the expensive wardrobe and accessories, maybe beautiful art or rare books, maybe a summer home, maybe a pool in your backyard, whatever those things are. And there's nothing wrong with that. But those are the byproduct of wealth, not the meaning of wealth. And I want to clarify this distinction. Directly underneath that descriptor, it also says the state of being rich. And that's interesting. What constitutes a state? A state of mind, a state of energy, a state of tangible things you can touch, feel, smell, taste, and so you have a response to that. And below that, it says plentiful supplies of a particular resource. And that one is the most interesting of all. Because what constitutes a resource? Is it a physical resource or something much more innate? Currently, we live in a world where physical resources are being argued about daily. Right? Enough food, enough housing, enough water, enough clothing, the disparity of wealth amongst classes, or even the return of castes. And although all of that may be true, it's not the origin point of the conversation, in my opinion. And if you're placing your focus upon it and having an internal dissonance with it or a reaction to it, then you're focusing on and then internally compounding the response emotions that come up, like lack and fear and worry and anxiousness, and a perpetuating feeling that results in powerlessness. What can I do about that? Now, please understand, I want to clarify that I'm not saying in any way that you do not get to feel whatever you feel is appropriate. You are an autonomous being and you are the authority of you. What I am saying is, how much of your time are you focusing on a particular mindset that yields you the result of feeling angry, tired, worn down, exhausted, burnt out, afraid, stressed, anxious, and eventually powerlessness? Now, are those anywhere near the feeling of being in a state of plentiful supplies of a particular resource? Clearly that's a no, right? So we've got a conflict. How can I live in the world when I see and hear things that I have feelings about, yet also be in pursuit of my dreams and my happiness and my future and my prosperity and my abundance of health and wealth and joy, without feeling guilt or shame or tone deaf or upset or stressed? It's kind of a conundrum, isn't it? Because those are two very different trajectories. This is where the art of alignment becomes the main conversation and teaching. We've all been conditioned to have our needs met by others. When we were babies, you couldn't leave home at 3 months and live on your own and pay your rent or pay your mortgage or grocery shop and cook and go to work. So all of our needs are being met by someone providing them. This is ingrained daily for years. And no one taught us anything about how our subconscious mind works, did they? Where was the class, anywhere along the lines in grade school or high school or college or university, where was the class that said, okay, now that you can walk and talk and tie your shoes and study and write exams and choose your own clothes and you remember where you live so you can take the bus to the mall and back and home, and you remember you could get a driver's license so you could go on further adventures and you still remembered how to get home. So what is that intelligence that's storing all of that? All of those memories, all of that learning, all of that data? And how does that work? And since we trained it to learn all the necessities, wouldn't learning that being in a state of plentiful supplies of a particular resource be good? Because that means now I start to have the understanding that it's not actually others that provide what I need anymore. It's this intelligence that learns what I need and it figures out the perfect alignment of how it comes to me. My job then is to know that it's working, even though I can't see it yet. That's where it all falls apart, doesn't it? I had you right up until I said, now you have to trust that it's working. Because our conditioning says, show me the evidence and then I'll believe. Because the last time I trusted and it didn't work out, I got hurt. I'm not doing that again. You're not going to trick me, Meg. Falling on my butt was not pleasant. So now we've got a world we're watching that feels very conflicted, on edge, in complete separation of itself, arguing all the time. Legacy media, or what we now call, television, and social media flooding you whenever you turn it on or open it up, and you believe 100% that your only capability is to be in response mode. But it isn't. Do you know that science has revealed that on average, we used to make 2,500 decisions a day. And now we make in excess of 35,000. 35,000. That's almost too much to comprehend, isn't it? You don't have a conscious memory of making 35,000 decisions yesterday, do you? Of course not. So how are we making those decisions? We are making a lot of them unconsciously. There is something on the rise, and it's called decision fatigue. Have you ever experienced that? I bet you have. Decision fatigue is not just feeling tired, it's a mental exhaustion caused by making too many decisions that lead to poor decisions, avoidance, impulsivity. So just as a little aside here, an interesting aside, cueing back to social media, the algorithm is designed to flood you with ad after ad, lighting up all the parts of your brain that makes decisions in order to receive a dopamine hit when you make that decision. You hit that add to cart, you buy that thing. And we've got a constant drain on your most powerful resource, your mental energy. Our brains actually have a limited capacity for mental energy, and constantly making decisions consumes that energy. So the more decisions you make throughout the day, the more your brain starts to look for shortcuts because it's effective and it's brilliant. This is really interesting because two things happen. In our brain's attempt to protect us, that's number one, we stop being present. We go unconscious. Number two, we stop listening. We resort to an already well-established habitual neural pathway. We go unconscious and our subconscious mind makes the decision based on what's familiar to us, so our programming, in an attempt to protect our vital mental resource. So, tying all of this together, we learn that others are the authorities and the providers, and we need to behave a certain way in order to receive what we need. So we have to perform well in school, in our job, in our relationships, and if we get it right, we're rewarded. Social media really drilled right into that and said, come here, beautiful one. I will reward you. Would you like this? Would you like this? I can help you feel this, or change this, or do this. It's it's magnetic almost. But all of that tends to zap our mental energy so that we are trained over and over and over again away from our own decision making, our own discovery of how we can absolutely train our minds to align with that state of believing we already have a plentiful supply of an abundant resource. That resource is so precious, it's being hacked daily. Why? Have you ever contemplated that? Because what is the result if you lose your belief that you get to create your life your way, the way you want it, no matter who's around you or no matter what's going on in the world? It's a pretty valuable resource. Millions of people giving their autonomy away and remaining mentally exhausted and in response mode only. That equates to full acceptance of whatever is put in front of me. Instead of, I decide. Right? I decide what I want. I decide what's right for me. I decide where I put my focus. I decide what's true for me. I decide what's no longer true for me. We were never taught that. We were never taught that once we reached a certain age and a level of maturity, emotional maturity and resiliency and self-responsibility, because I can walk and talk and drive and write exams and do all the things, that we now become the authority of our lives. We were never taught that. We now become the one who provides for our needs and desires. We were never taught that. And we don't have to perform to be validated. And we don't have to be perfect for anyone else. And we don't have to stay locked into response mode in overwhelm, looking for shortcuts just to manage our day. We actually have this incredible innate intelligence within us that governs over our body, it operates our central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. And we have a relationship with it. It is part of us. You've heard me say before, when you go to sleep at night, who's making your lungs continue to breathe in and out? What is running your heart so it continues to beat? What is that intelligence? It's just unconscious until you discover it. So wealth is not, therefore, about having all the things. The things are wonderful, whatever your things are. And if you have judgment about others who enjoy the things, that's something to contemplate. Because the origin point of that is saying, I can't do it for me, so I'm really angry that you did it for you. It gets tricky. Because we want to make people bad, right? When really the conversation is much more innate than that. For example, why do bad people have a lot of money? That's a question someone asked me, a client asked me once. We were working on wealth alignment. We had a goal of building up a business and wealth alignment. So what's that alignment? Meg, why do a lot of bad people seem to have money? That they don't do things for other people. They're not philanthropists. They don't do nice things for others. They're quite selfish with their money. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? How did they acquire that? That's alignment. So let's look at Al Capone for an example. Al Capone in Chicago. Everybody knows how he basically took over the city, right? It was an Italian mob. He had a lot of men working for him. He started to really control the city. He owned all the speakeasies. And I actually have a family story affiliated with Al Capone that I'll share because it's kind of interesting. The short version is that my grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side both lived in Chicago. My dad and his brother and sister were all young at the time. And my grandfather was a produce broker. So he was the middleman between the farmers and the grocery chains or the stores that were selling the produce. So he was a produce broker. And at the time, my grandmother drove a Cadillac. And my grandfather was the top producer in Chicago. So one day my grandfather is walking to work. They lived not far from where his offices were, and so he used to like to walk for fitness. So he walked to work, and he crossed the corner of a busy intersection, a busy street. And on that corner, he happened upon, and it was all sort of instinct that took over, there was a man who pulled a gun on another man, and it was right in front of my grandfather. So as instinct took over, he grabbed the guy and took him to the ground, wrestling the gun away from him. And so everything just sort of settled. They went their own way. My grandfather went to work, kind of left it, forgot about it. So not that long after, he's walking to work, and a car pulls up beside him. And this is like something out of a movie, but it's all true. And they pick him up, they cover his head. I think they blindfolded him. They threw him into the back seat of a car and they blindfolded him. And the story, as my father told it, was that at that moment my grandfather thought, like, my goose is kind of cooked. I've upset the wrong person here. I'm not sure I'm coming out of this one. So they drive and they drive and they drive so that he can't see where they're going, and they land at a place and they walk him inside, and then they take the blindfold off, and he's in this great big mansion, and there's a big winding staircase, and on every second stair there's a man in a very expensive suit with a sawed-off shotgun. And my grandfather looked and thought, uh-oh. He gets escorted into a room. And this is the scene that I always think would have been something you'd see in a movie. And I think it probably was. So he's walked into an office, and the chair, this leather chair, you see the back of the chair. And then all of a sudden the chair swivels around, and it's Al Capone. And he's sitting there, and he looks at my grandfather, and my grandfather looks at him, and he says, are you so-and-so? And my grandfather says, yes. And he said, on such and such a day, did you wrestle this man, take his gun away from him? And my grandfather says, yes. And he says to him, that was my right-hand man. I now owe you a favor. So my grandfather is silent, and he says, if you have any trouble, you go back to that corner and you put the word out. You just talk to somebody that's there in a suit. You'll recognize him. You put the word out, and it'll get back to me if you need anything. And they walk him out, and they blindfold him, and they drive him back, and they drop him off. And at this point, my grandfather is like, what just happened? So, several months later, my grandmother's car is stolen. Now, my grandparents were affluent to be driving a Cadillac in those times. And in those times, one, imagine how powerful this man is that he says, just go to that corner and tell somebody and it'll get back to me. What does that say about the level of power he had? Second, in that time, cars were disassembled within hours for parts and sold and distributed and gone. So the likelihood of a car that's a Cadillac being stolen and coming back are like... So my grandfather goes down to the corner and sees a couple of guys just sort of standing around. And he says to them, I'm supposed to tell you, if I need something, this and this happened. And they just nod, and my grandfather goes on with his day thinking not much of it. Within 4 hours or 6 hours, it was morning before dinner time. The car was parked in the driveway with the umbrella still in the back seat and the groceries that were purchased. She had just pulled in and she had gone into the house, and then they stole the car, so it had the groceries in the back seat. The groceries were still there. Now that's kind of terrifying and extraordinary all at the same time. But that's not the end of the story. So it's sometime after that where Al Capone decides he would also like to be in the produce business, because all of the alcohol is made from the grapes sales, and he owns all the speakeasies that are selling all the illegal bootleg alcohol. So my grandfather's at work, and one day Al Capone walks in with 2 big meaty guys and guns. And he walks into his office, and again, just like a movie, he's got the fedora hat on, he's got a cigar in his mouth, and my grandfather just looks up and sees it as Al Capone, and Al Capone looks at him and he says, do I know you? Because I never forget a face. And my grandfather said, yes. And he explained the story about what happened that day on the street, and Al Capone said to him, did I repay the favor? And he said, yes. My wife's car was stolen and it was returned that day, and thank you very much. And Al Capone cut him off and said, good, because I never want to be in business with someone that I owe a favor to. And my grandfather looked at him, and then Al Capone said to him, you and me, we're going to be partners. And my grandfather said, I don't have a partner. And Al Capone said, I'm not asking. And that was the day that changed the trajectory of my lineage, because my grandfather left that day, went home, and said, we have to go. because I will either end up in prison for laundering money or dead. Because once they learn everything, they don't need me, once they take over all of the contracts in the business. So he literally walked away from the number one business in Chicago in the produce industry. My father said he remembered, and he separated them. His wife and daughter went separately. He and my dad and my uncle went in a white van, sort of very, inconspicuous. And my father said he was about 11 or 12 at the time, and he remembers there was a shotgun under the passenger seat because my grandfather was so alarmed that they would follow him because he had all the knowledge of how the business worked, right? So he moved to Canada. His wife and daughter followed. Everybody was okay, and it was, for the longest time, in my family, it was like, we don't talk about that. And I remember elder siblings saying, like, we don't talk about that out loud. But now, it's so far past. But for the longest time, they just didn't speak of it. And so my lineage then grew up Canadian, but there's also American. But that's how quickly it changed. He ran from what potentially could have been the wiping out of my entire lineage. Like I wouldn't exist and sit here be talking to you right now. So why do bad people acquire that much power? Well, there's alignment, right? Capone never doubted what he was going to do. Never, not for a second. He was so aligned with that desire that he magnetized everyone that he needed to him. And they saw him as their provider and protector, right? All of those men working with him, working for him. And it went on and it was sustained for years. It became so big that they said, Chicago was Capone's town. Nobody messed with Capone in Chicago. So this is not about right or wrong, is the point, right? Because that's being in a very predictable response. Because if that were the case, if only people who did the right things acquired that surplus and that state, we'd be living in a different world. But it's not about judgment. And we really need to look at that. Like, where do we have our judgments about what we want and why we can't have it? This is much more innate, right? Discovering why you believe what you believe and then training your mind to accept what you want instead, while navigating the levels of limitations we built for ourselves and opening them up to new possibilities, to completely different potentials. So often when I work with clients on wealth, we discover their root beliefs that go all the way back to childhood. This conditioning, it's how it formed. When we see how it was formed, we can change it. And we can teach your brain a completely new truth, because it doesn't judge what's right or wrong. There is no analytical skill in the subconscious mind. That's all up here. That's in our thinking mind. That's our conscious mind, taking in that data and analyzing it. But subconscious is the innate intelligence that stores all of your memories and where you got hurt, where there's heightened emotion, where there's pain, where there's fear. It will prioritize that. And then when we're making those 35,000 decisions a day looking for those shortcuts, what do you think those shortcuts are? They are neural pathways that go directly from that programming. This means this, and then therefore I have my response. This is what I say, this is what I do, this is how I behave. It governs that response because it comes from an origin point. It comes from somewhere. And we can change what that was and what we made it mean. Right? Judging what's wrong out here never changes what belief is going on in here. And so blaming something else, a system, a person, whatever you want to put to it, I know it sounds tone deaf. I don't mean it in an insulting way. I mean it in a discovery way. We did not learn what we have access to that actually is the intelligence that creates the circumstances we're after. And so the work is all in here, not out there, right? And what was really interesting working with clients is each time that new truth landed, every time something unexplainable happened. And I'll put that in quotations, something unexplainable happened. A money windfall came, a surprise check appears, an unexpected bonus, an unexpected triple bonus. These are real responses from my clients. So it feels kind of magical and mystical, like what just happened, unexplainable, but it isn't. It's the subconscious understanding of something completely new that's true for you. And I really feel that this is the most important conversation to be having right now, to shift our focus from the other events and that decision fatigue into our inner capabilities. So in closing, the last thing I want to mention is that I've created a program, and I'm going to take everybody through this over 4 Saturdays because I run a very busy one-to-one private practice Monday to Friday. So I teach group work on Saturdays, Saturday mornings in Eastern Time. And the replays will be available for 1 full year so that you can go back, you can study it, you can practice it, you can apply it, you can do the work. There's going to be group hypnosis that you can listen to separately. I provide MP3s of that so that you can just put it on your phone, not when you're driving, but other times when you really want to anchor what you want to change in. And this is something that we were never taught in school. We didn't learn. But when we do, the outside circumstances for us individually start to change. And the piece that's so important about that is, instead of expecting someone else to do something that you feel is better, why don't you do it? Why don't you become everything that you want to become, and then you help everywhere you want to help? Because that is absolutely available to you. Changing someone else or something else like a system, you're fighting up against so many things. But here, you can do all of that for you. And then you can influence all of the rest. So why not you? You can find the program on the website if you go to megadamsonhypnotherapy.com. It's on the main menu under Shop, and underneath Shop, Master Courses, and the program is called Allure, A-L-L-U-R-E. And if you're watching this through my newsletter or through a social media post, there's a direct link in the text body. Thank you for another important, meaningful, and really beautiful conversation. I truly love spending this time together with you every month. I love making these videos. I love bringing tools and contemplations to you so that we can really shift our focus and come back to our capabilities. Be well. Contemplate. Rewatch. Think of what comes up for you and investigate why. Consider joining the program if it's the right fit for you. If you're ready to do that work and you're serious about changing your life, you might be really surprised what you discover. And I'll see you next month. Bye for now.